It started with the sound of rain against the window, soft at first, then heavier, like someone drumming their fingers impatiently on glass. The house lay in silence under a thick glass dome, where you could hear only the faint hum of the old heater and the dry ticks of the wall clock. Beside me, almost touching my shoulder, Mark slept, loudly, heavily, like someone who had nothing to fear and nothing to think about. And I lay with my eyes open, staring into the dark, feeling two small beings moving inside me, nudging and kicking, as if rehearsing a chaotic, offbeat choreography. 26 weeks pregnant with twins. Every attempt to roll onto my side sent a flash of pain through my lower back, as if my spine could not bear someone else's weight. I slowly sat up, supporting my swollen belly with my hand, and whispered, almost inaudible, "Hush, we're okay. Mama's just tired." In answer, a light kick beneath my ribs, a sign they could hear me. I rose, shifting my weight carefully. Each step felt like I was carrying two heavy sandbags tied to my waist. In the kitchen, I set the kettle on and sat at the table, staring into the dark, unblinking window. Outside, the glass, empty Cleveland streets dusted with frost. Inside, the buzz of thoughts that offered no shelter. I remembered how it had all begun. When I told Mark I was pregnant, he shone like a little boy. He hugged me, spun me, said, "Finally, we'll have a legacy, someone to be proud of me." Back then, it felt sweet. But after the ultrasound, when we saw two hearts instead of one, his face changed. The joy vanished almost instantly. From that moment on, tenderness turned into mockery. He pinched the skin on my hips and said, "Careful, or you'll roll away from me." He laughed when I waddled across the room. Penguin in action. I tried to laugh along, but each joke cut deeper. I no longer felt like a wife. I felt like the service staff in my own house. And worse, I found myself thinking more and more, what if after the babies are born, he doesn't change? That night, in the dark kitchen with a cup of tea in my hands, I promised myself one thing. No matter what the future holds, they will never see me broken. The next morning, I stood at the mirror, toothbrush in hand, watching how my face had changed in just a few weeks. Cheekbones softer, eyes swollen from restless nights, hair clinging to my temples. Mark leaned against the doorway, sipping coffee. No smile, just that half-smirk he'd been wearing lately, like he was in on a joke I didn't understand. "You're big," he said casually, as if stating the weather. "Don't overdo it today. You'll tire yourself, and then I'll have to hear about it." He walked away before I could answer, the scent of coffee trailing after him like an accusation. That day, I tried reading, tried folding laundry, but every sound in the apartment grated. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the muffled TV from the living room where Mark had planted himself for hours. By evening, a storm had settled over Cleveland. Rain lashed the windows, rattling them in their frames. I cooked dinner in silence. Mark scrolled through his phone at the table, barely touching the food. It was when his phone buzzed and he turned his body away from me, shoulders hunched, lips curling into a smile meant for someone else, that something inside me shifted. Not jealousy, something colder. A realization that the life I had imagined, two parents holding their newborns, smiling at each other through exhaustion, was evaporating. The twins rolled and stretched inside me, and I whispered to them, "We might have to be our own army." It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. 3 days later, the first contraction hit me like a fist from the inside. It wasn't supposed to happen yet, not at 26 weeks. I was in the kitchen, slicing bread, when the knife slipped in my hand from the sudden, sharp pain. I froze, my breath shallow, palm pressed to the counter for balance. Mark was in the living room, laughing at something on the TV. I called his name once. He didn't answer. I called again, louder. He appeared in the doorway, irritation already on his face. "What now?" I think something's wrong." "You're always saying that. Sit down, breathe, you're fine." But I wasn't fine. Over the next hour, the pains came in waves. At one point, I found myself kneeling on the bathroom floor, forehead against the cold tile, whispering to the twins, "Not yet, please, not yet." Mark finally agreed to drive me to the hospital, but only after finishing his drink. The rain outside had turned to sleet. Every turn of the wheel felt too sharp, every stop too late. By the time we reached the ER, my clothes were damp from the cold, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Nurses swarmed around me. Mark stayed in the corner, scrolling his phone. Not once did he take my hand. As they wheeled me into a room, one nurse leaned in close and said softly, "We'll do everything we can to keep them in there a little longer." And for the first time that night, I realized she wasn't just talking about the babies. They attached monitors to my belly, 2 separate pulses blinking across the screen, uneven but present. A doctor explained in calm, clipped sentences that my body was showing signs of preterm labor. Words like magnesium drip and steroids for lung development floated in the air, landing on me like the weight of bricks. Mark stood against the far wall, arms folded, eyes darting to the clock every few minutes. He looked less like a husband and more like a man waiting for an appointment he didn't want to attend. When the contractions slowed after the first round of medication, he finally approached the bed. "You see? Overreacting again," he said quietly, almost smug. "I told you it was nothing." I stared at him, searching for the man I once trusted with my entire future. By the second night, the walls of the room felt too close. At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of my own heart pounding louder than the monitor. A cold thought slid in, uninvited. What if they come now? What if they don't survive? I reached for Mark's hand, desperate for something human in the sterile glow. He didn't move. He was asleep in the visitor's chair, his phone in his lap, the screen still glowing faintly. The twins kicked, restless again. I whispered to them, my voice trembling, "We're in this together. Just hold on a little longer. Mama's here." But as I lay back, staring at the ceiling, another truth pulsed through me. If I was going to survive this, it wouldn't be because he stood beside me. It would be because I learned to stand without him. It happened on the 29th day. I'd been in and out of the hospital for weeks, sometimes for monitoring, sometimes for medication, always under the shadow of any day now. That morning, the streets glazed with the thaw of a night's frost. I felt an odd calm, as though my body had decided something before I had. The first contraction came while a nurse was checking my vitals. She said, "It's time." The room filled with movement, hands adjusting IV lines, voices calling for the doctor, a flurry of blue scrubs. Mark arrived 20 minutes later, smelling faintly of beer. He stayed near the wall, silent, watching as if he were an observer at someone else's disaster. The pain was raw and blinding, pulling me under, forcing me to dig into the very core of myself. Somewhere between contractions, I realized I wasn't thinking about him at all. I was thinking about them, about the way their tiny hearts had fought for weeks to stay in rhythm, about the promise I'd made that night in the kitchen. When the first cry came, it was thin, but defiant. A second followed moments later. They whisked the babies to the neonatal unit before I could even touch them. Mark left shortly after, muttering something about needing fresh air. I didn't ask if he'd be back. I knew the days ahead would be hard, maybe harder than anything before, but I also knew this. I would never again wait for someone to save me, because some battles are fought with armies, and some are fought with nothing but a mother's will.